Hi, and welcome. Welcome to April and to the April Aging Well program. We're so glad you joined us. We're always grateful that you're here, and I'm always so grateful that I've got our Aging Well team helping me. I have the easy part. I get to hang out with y'all. But Tom Roth with our CTSI, Courtney Hayes with our Pepper Center on Aging, and Audrey Belfaro with our Alzheimer's Disease Research Center are some of the ones behind the scenes making this all happen. So as always, thank you to y'all. This spring is around the corner, and but I have to say, I almost kind of want my money back. I'm over in Nashville today. I've been over here for a few days for spending time with our daughter and also with meetings over at Vanderbilt today. And it is freezing here. And then I hear from my husband over in Winston that it's been pouring down rain. So I am ready for some real spring to come back. I think we need to start a petition to Mother Nature to bring spring back. But we have got an amazing program for you tonight. I'm so excited that we have got a great speaker and two fun feature segments. And if y'all are anything like me, it is so fun to discover a new restaurant. And it may or may not be new to the world, but it's certainly new to me. And Don and I had that experience to get to discover Betty on Burke, which is such a fun place. It's on Burke Street, so near the West End neighborhood where we live. But Jay Pierce is a co-owner and the chef on Betty and Burke, and he is going to demonstrate how easy it is to make one of his signature and most popular dishes, their lemon spaghetti. And if you pay attention, there are no edits in his cooking. So what he did is really as short and sweet as what it appears on here. And then he's going to show us how to make the lemon vinaigrette sauce that really makes this dish. So without any more hesitation, I'm going to turn it over to Chef Jay.
Hi, I'm Jay Pierce. We're at Betty on Burke today, and I'd like to thank Deb for with Aging Well for asking, how we make lemon spaghetti. So our lemon spaghetti dish here is one of our signatures. People really love it. And I think it's a wonderful dish because it comes together so simply. There's some things you can do in advance, but it's almost like a Mr. Potato Head recipe. You can swap out a lot of the ingredients and still wind up with something delicious. The trick is just balancing. So, I'm going to turn on this burner. We're at the bar. This is a kitchen. There's people coming and going. But such is restaurant life, right? So we start with extra virgin olive oil. Some people believe if you have good extra virgin olive oil, why would you heat it up? I heat it up because I'm going to eat it with pasta. So we add a little bit of roasted tomatoes, which are roasted in advance. This is the part where you can do what you like. There's not a lot of things in season in the spring, so roasted tomatoes make a lot of sense. It brings flavor to something that's got not so impactful a flavor. But pretty soon, this dish, asparagus, will be appearing in the market, and this will be fantastic with sliced asparagus or blanched broccoli or any other vegetable that that you love. So anyway, since they're already cooked, we're really just kind of heating this up, and then we're going to season it with a little bit of salt and pepper. It doesn't take much. And then my spaghetti here has been previously cooked. So it's cold, pre-cooked spaghetti, but you can use any kind of pasta you like. I like to think of this dish as it's great with leftovers. You had pasta from last night that you had with red sauce. This is almost like a warm pasta salad. So I add my spaghetti in there, but we're not really sauteing the spaghetti. We're going to add a little bit of dry white wine. That creates steam. That steam is heating it up. It's probably fogging up your lens, right? The next thing we do, the secret ingredient here, and I'll have to send you the recipe, is this lemon vinaigrette. So it's essentially whole lemons and grapeseed oil. You can use extra virgin olive oil. You can use what you like. But we cut the lemons in quarters, remove all the seeds, and puree it in a blender. And that literally is the whole dish, you know? So you toss it like that. It's oil, lemon, good oil, lemon, vegetable, and look at that. So, you know, you can put shrimp in here. You can put lobster, you can put crab, you can put tofu. You know, it's full of flavor. It's simple, it's quick. It could be lunch, it could be dinner for 6, you know. But you're layering the flavors. You know, the lemon vinaigrette is really intense, but pasta's kind of bland. So they balance each other out. You get some more acidity from tomatoes, but you also get a lot of sugar, a lot of sweetness from tomatoes. You know, it's just, I don't know what to say. It's easy. There's no excuse for not making something that's delicious. If you understand the building blocks, you understand what role each ingredient plays. We just showed you how to make lemon spaghetti, or one way to make lemon spaghetti. Who knows the right way to make lemon spaghetti? But what I want to eat is vegetables, a vinaigrette, and pasta. And I want it warm. You can add cheese to it. You can leave cheese off. But the ingredient, the recipe that ties this all together is this lemon vinaigrette that I stumbled upon. And, you know, I sort of made it my own, but we will send you a copy of this recipe. And what it does is it takes whole lemons. You know, we cut it into chunks and remove all the seeds, but it's got pith, peel, juice, pulp, any other thing. And we're going to make the restaurant size version here, show you how to do that, but we'll have a more modest recipe for you. But what we do is we take these are washed organic lemons that are all the seeds have been removed from, and put them in our blender, right? So it's 2 cups of lemons chopped up. And then, you know, one thing I love to use are leeks. Leeks don't get used enough. You know, the thing about leeks is you're going to puree it. You just really want to cut across these fibers so you don't get anything stringy. And in case you don't remember, leeks grow in the dirt. They like sandy soil. So whenever you chop leeks, you want to put them into a container with deep water, swish the water around, and pull them out of the water so the dirt settles to the bottom. These are washed, so that makes things faster, right? When you have a prep crew. But one advantage of making a foundational recipe like this, or a base recipe, is that you can make this and have it sitting in your fridge, and you can have 4 portions in there, or you can have enough to make this pasta recipe 10 times, and you don't have to do this every time you want it. So anyway, lemons, leeks, we've got rice wine vinegar. I read one time that citric acid hits on a different part of your palate than acetic acid, which is in vinegar. And so some of the best vinaigrettes have both a citrus juice and have vinegar in it, and so it sort of tastes more round. It affects more your mouth, and I think you end up using less salt. But what do I know? Anyway, those things. This is 3 cups of olive oil, and this recipe calls for salt, right? So we're gonna add that. We're gonna turn on this blender. It's gonna make a lot of noise, but it's well worth it. So start slow, you know, get the liquid to release, and then you crank it up. Once you have it pureed, you know, you remove the little top part and you drizzle in your oil. It is a vinaigrette. It's all things you recognize, you know, no preservatives. I guess lemon juice would deserve it. Anyway, you agitate the bottom, make sure you don't have any chunks. Wish you were here. It smells great. But this is the dressing. You know, we can pour it back in here. You can toss salad greens in this. It's wonderful. You don't have to cook with it. Like I said, our recipe makes quite a bit. We'll slim it down for you. You know, it'll make a little bit more sense. But I think you need a couple of go-to base recipes in your back pocket. Go into the farmer's market a treat, because you go, oh, I know what I can do is I can make that lemon spaghetti recipe and include fava beans today, or broccoli, or whatever. You want to know another secret? Look at this. Shelf liner under my cutting board, so it doesn't move. Isn't that great? So here's to Aging Well. Here's to Betty on Burke, where we love lemon spaghetti. And the folks that come here seem to like it as well. And I'm Jay, and this is what we do. Thanks.
So Chef Jay was gracious enough to send me home with that pasta. And I will tell you, it was absolutely wonderful. So light, so fresh. And like you said, going to the farmer's market, it even inspires me that maybe there's something that I can do to enhance that. So anyway, it was delicious. And again, thank you, Betty on Burke, for sharing your talents with us. And speaking of sharing talents, I don't know if y'all are like me, but with spring, I am living outside, and I love to have my noisy neighbors. And I'm not talking about the ones that are having a party. I'm talking about the ones that are chirping up in the trees, that are down having water in my little fountain or the little waterfall that we built. It's so much fun. It's, to me, one of the best parts of spring. If there is a best part, are the birds are here, and it's the ones maybe that are migrating, the ones that live here all year. But Rebecca Craps is the Environment and Natural Resources Extension Agent with the North Carolina Cooperative Extension Office. And she has got so many easy, wonderful tips for us to how we can make our backyards more bird friendly, and even create a safer environment for some of those migrating birds. But she has got some wonderful ideas that she's about to share with you. And then I'm going to give you a testimonial on the other side of her video about how much fun one of her ideas is, because I can't wait when I interview these folks to get home and incorporate some of their ideas. So I'm going to invite Rebecca to share with us how we can make our yards, our green spaces, anywhere that we can come in contact with, more bird friendly.
Thanks, Deb. It's great to be part of Aging Well. So this is a great time of year. You can see that we're outside. Trees are starting to leaf out, and flowers are starting to bloom. This is a great time of year for us to talk about birds. I'm sure people are starting to see a lot of our resident birds, a lot of cardinals, American robins around their backyards. But this is an especially good time of year to talk about birds because of spring migration. So here in our area, typically between the middle of April to the middle of May is when we're going to see a large number of migratory birds. Some of those are going to stop over, so you may actually see them during the day building nests, getting water, getting food. And then at nighttime, many of them are going to continue their journey north. And so they're from a little after sunset until early morning, they're going to be flying well overhead, as high as 10,000 feet, moving north in really large numbers. And so it's a good time of year for people to think about some things that they can do in their own backyards to help benefit our resident birds that live here year round, and also to help support our migrating birds. Especially with our migratory birds, there's an exciting program that's Cornell Lab of Ornithology, Audubon have all worked together to champion what's called Lights Out. The city of Winston-Salem actually has signed on to be a Lights Out city, and there's a city ordinance that was passed in the fall about it. And the goal is just to minimize urban light pollution. So migrating birds use the star map and the moon to get where they're going. And so when we add a lot of light pollution in urban areas, it can cause birds to get confused, to get lost, to get off track. And so an easy thing that homeowners can do is to turn their lights off at night, especially upward facing white lights, or using security lights that only come on when there's motion detected. That still helps to minimize light. It's also really helpful to close curtains so that light from inside is not reflecting out of windows. Typically, an hour or two after sunset is when we would want to turn our lights off until early morning, just to help minimize that light pollution. So that's specific to migratory birds in the spring, but there are a lot of things people can do year-round in their backyards to help support birds. So what's really important to think about is in our backyards, we're really just trying to mimic a natural native bird habitat. So if you think about not in an urban area like where we are, but out in a forest, birds are going to have native plants that they can eat. They're going to have insects that they can eat. They're going to have different types of trees where they can build their nests and take shelter. And then they're going to take advantage of natural water sources like creeks and streams, water that pools during the year. So when you're thinking about your backyard, you want to have all of those same things: food source, shelter, and a water source. It's great to put feeders out. I would encourage people to start looking and paying attention if you really want to see birds in your backyard, or you're wanting to feed the birds that you already have in your backyard. It's really great to pay attention to what kind of birds you have. Different birds, just like other wildlife, eat different things. So some of the birds in your backyard may be seed and grain eaters. So if you're putting out feeders or planting native landscape plants, you want to make sure you have some that are going to provide, a grain and a seed source. But a lot of other birds are going to be insect eaters. So having a healthy base of native plants is important because that's going to form the bottom of our food pyramid, and then right on top of that are insects. And so if we're thinking about supporting bird life, we want to have lots of plants and lots of insects. And of course native is better because that's what our birds are adapted to eat. So having a lot of native plants, which promotes biodiversity of insects, is really beneficial for food. So when it comes to talking about different kinds of food for different kinds of birds based on their native diet, we think a lot about putting out bird seed because a lot of birds that live in our area, especially year-round, are granivores. But a lot of our migrating birds, and one of our crowd favorite birds, the eastern bluebird, are actually insectivores. And so as adults, they prefer to eat insects over seeds and fruit. So we don't often think about putting food out intentionally for insectivores, but a really great option that eastern bluebirds love are mealworms. And you can buy them in a big bag at most stores that sell bird seed. And you can put those out and attract eastern bluebirds and other migrating birds that might be coming through. It's also really great, even some of our bird friends that eat seeds during the year feed insects to their young because they have a much higher protein source than grains and seeds. So even a bird like a cardinal that's going to eat primarily seeds and grains as an adult is still going to feed its young insects. And so having mealworms out, especially this time of year as birds are making nests, laying eggs, as those eggs hatch and they're trying to feed their young, having that extra source of protein that's easy for them to access to take to their young is really beneficial. There are a lot of great resources. Extension actually has this managing backyards for birds PDF that will get sent to you in your materials after that you can flip through. It has a list of 100 and something different plants based on the type of bird. So if you have a lot of cardinals in your backyard, it'll tell you what types of plants to plant specifically to support cardinals and lots of other birds as well. So that kind of takes care of food sources. The next thing is some kind of water source. Bird baths are great. It's really important to keep those clean and keep them filled. And also being aware of their placement because water gets really hot in the summer and birds are less likely to utilize a bird bath if the water is really, really hot. So kind of thinking about having bird baths in the shade. Birds love running water. I mentioned in a native habitat, they're going to use creeks and streams. Most of the water that they're going to use in their native environment is actually going to be moving. So, little waterfalls and things like that are great for birds. And then shelter. Shelter's one we often don't think about. We put out our bird feeders in a place where we want to see our birds, right? We want to sit on the back porch with our cup of coffee in the morning and listen to the birds and see the birds as they're coming in. But we also want to make sure our birds are safe. And so having shelter near feeders is really important. If we think about things like hawks, they will very quickly figure out where bird feeders are located and where birds are gathering. And so having bushes and other shrubs within about 10 feet or so of bird feeders is really important, so that if there is a threat of any kind, birds have a quick place that they can take cover. So those are really the main things that homeowners can do and can think about in terms of supporting migration by turning lights out, closing curtains in the evening after sunset. And we're talking spring migration now because it's spring, but the same thing is true in fall. Birds will also fly back south. They follow resources, so wherever the food is, that's where birds are going to go. And so we also want to turn our lights out in the fall as well during migration. There are some really great tools that people can use if you're really interested in finding out what kind of birds you might have around your yard. We often hear them, but we don't see them. A lot of, especially migrating birds, are going to be way high up in the trees. So we'll hear them, we may never actually see much more than them flitting around in the trees. But there's an app that you can download called Merlin that will actually detect birds by the sounds that they're making. And so it's one of my favorite apps. I was actually out today walking some trails down in Alamance County to prepare for a class. And what I like to do, although it will drain your phone battery pretty quickly, is just to turn on my Merlin app and put my phone in my pocket. And then as we're hiking, it picks up all the different birds that we're hearing, and you get a nice list of everything. And so today we heard a lot of our normal, resident birds. Most of us would kind of recognize a cardinal sort of laser sort of sound that they make. But today we actually did hear 3 migratory birds. So it's a little early for us to be at the peak time for migration, but we are starting to see some warblers. So today my Merlin app picked up a Louisiana wood thrush or water thrush. Picked up a pine warbler, which I actually haven't heard one the last little bit that we've been filming, but when I first got back to our office today, I heard one up in some of our pine trees here. And a yellow-throated warbler. So we did pick up, and a white-eyed vireo today, actually. So those are 4 migratory birds that we picked up today down in Alamance County, just by turning that app on and letting it run while we were hiking around the park. So that's a great app. It can also do pictures. So if you're able to, that's challenging with birds. They don't like to pose for photos. But if you can get a photo, you can also upload that photo, and it can tell you what type of bird you're seeing. It'll also just generate a list of what should be in your area at any given time, so that you can not only see what birds might be out and about, but it'll give you information about the types of food that they might eat. So if you're seeing them in your backyard, you'll know what kind of seed to put out or what kind of plants would be beneficial for that. And then the final piece, I mentioned shelter in terms of natural shelter. Bushes and shrubs are great. A lot of us also like to put out nest boxes. So I did bring a bluebird box specifically. So this was actually not something that I knew until I started working for Extension, that different birds have different preferences on the size of the hole in the nest box. So when you hear of a bluebird house, I used to just think, well, any old bird could use that. But it's very specific to bluebirds because of the size of the opening. And it's also important, this one is a good example. It has this metal piece around it. Woodpeckers like to make themselves at home wherever they can find a spot. And so they will peck away at a wooden nest box and make that opening bigger so that they can use it. And so having something that keeps that size will help ensure that predators, it's not going to keep all the black snakes out of your bluebird boxes. There's no easy way to do that, but it'll keep other birds from getting into the nest box that shouldn't. Brown-headed nuthatches are another example. Here in Winston out at Tanglewood Park, the Audubon Bird Trail, the first section has a lot of pine trees along the golf course, and a lot of those pine trees have nest boxes that look similar to this one, slightly smaller hole, because they're designed for brown-headed nuthatches, which prefer a slightly smaller hole. So this resource that I mentioned earlier that you'll get the PDF copy of actually has a page in it that talks about all the different kinds of birds and what size nest box and opening they need. So it's a great resource if, depending on what kind of birds you're trying to attract and what kind of birds you already have in your backyard, that can help you decide if you're going to put out a nest box, what kind to put out. So I did mention black snakes can be a big problem when it comes to having nesting boxes in your yard. There are a couple things that you can do to minimize that risk. It's not going to eliminate it entirely. Rat snakes are crafty. If they want to get somewhere, they'll get there. You can use baffles like you might use with squirrels. That will slow a lot of them down because it is a lot of work for them to get up and over. But one thing to think about if you're using a baffle, if this is on a tree, our snakes are often going to come down from the treetop. So having some kind of cover or mounting nest boxes, feeders on poles that are actually close enough to trees that birds have shelter if they need it, but are not immediately underneath branches, can help to minimize that risk because it's not as easy for snakes to access the feeders or the nest boxes as it is if they're actually attached to a tree. Another crowd favorite bird, aside from the eastern bluebird, are hummingbirds. So we actually have 5 hummingbirds that have been identified in our area. 4 of those are specifically migratory. So you might see them and then they'll be gone because they're moving on further north to nest for the summer. The ruby-throated hummingbird, which is always everyone's favorite, will stay here throughout the summer. So for hummingbirds, they prefer flowers that are tubular shaped. If you think about the shape of their beak, those are compatible. So thinking about certain types of native honeysuckle plants, Carolina jessamine, those are all good plants to plant for hummingbirds. Now is also a good time to put out hummingbird feeders. It's really important when putting out hummingbird feeders not to use red food coloring. For a long time, it was thought to put that in there to attract them, which they are attracted to the color red, but it's better to get red glass feeders and to use just the sugar water mixture in those feeders. It's also really important to make sure that those are cleaned often. Just a simple vinegar water solution works well to clean them, and making sure that they're refilled relatively often with fresh sugar water is a great way to support hummingbirds that are either passing through or our ruby-throated hummingbirds that'll be here throughout the year. So where we are right now at the Forsyth County Agricultural Building, there are a number of birds that we can hear calling and chirping all around us. We've been watching an American robin, getting some worms up out of the ground and flying up into the trees. Things are starting to turn green around us, so birds are very active this time of year. And so we hope that you're able to spend some time in your backyard, create a great backyard space for birds, and that you're able to enjoy sitting and listening to them and watching them as they come and go.
It is so much fun to do whatever I can to identify birds. I have this book that is so beat up. I've had it for years and I like it because it's categorized, the pages are categorized by what color the majority of the feathers are of that bird. But I never knew there was such a thing as an app that could identify the birds by their chirping, by their songs. And I just need to tell you, when I was working out in the yard, I was having a blast because I've never been any kind of bird expert. I love them all, but I've never been able to identify them until this app. And then Rebecca was right. I had actually laid it on an outdoor table, my phone, and then forgot about it while I was doing some of my gardening. And when I came back to it, I mean, there were like 12 different birds that had been singing that I had just been enjoying in mass and had not been thinking or knowledgeable enough to be able to identify them. So that Merlin app is so fun. It's free. And it is just, I just love it. I could not wait to share it with my grandsons, to let them know these are ways that it's so easy for us all to become bird experts. And, I've mentioned a couple of times about me working out in the yard, right? And a couple months ago, I believe I shared with y'all that I had found a skin cancer, or I'd found a bump on the back of my hand. And I'm good about wearing sunscreen. But, when you're digging in the dirt, I'm washing my hands a lot. Wasn't thinking that every time I did that, I was washing sunscreen off. So now, after I had my surgery, and Dr. An did a beautiful job, not just getting that awful cancer off of me, but did a beautiful job. You can't even see a scar. But now I am an evangelist for wearing gloves when I'm outside doing the gardening. But when she was stitching up my hand, we started talking about aging well. And she was so kind and so gracious. And she goes, I'd love to come and share what I know with your Aging Well participants. So Dr. Christine Ahn is an assistant professor with the Wake Forest University School of Medicine in dermatology and pathology. And so she is going to be sharing with us how we can stay safe in the sun. It's important. We still need to play outside, but ways that we can be safe to our skin. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. An, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much. I am going to share my screen here. So I'm thrilled to be here. This is kind of like the stuff that drives all of my clinical work. So I'm very excited to talk about this topic. And it's extremely timely because even though we have this little cold spell right now, we're kind of going into the warmer months. So I think this is a really great time to touch upon this topic. So I wanted to talk to you about what does it mean to be sun safe? And I have no relevant financial relationships to disclose and nothing related to this talk. So May is Melanoma and Skin Cancer Awareness Month. So what we know is that each year in the US, about 6 million people are treated for skin cancer of any kind. Nearly $9 billion is spent on skin cancer treatment in the US each year. And we have established May as Melanoma and Skin Cancer Awareness Month and designated the first Monday of the month of May as Melanoma Monday. And it's all to sort of raise awareness about melanoma and skin cancer and what we can do to protect ourselves. So to talk about a wide view of the scope of melanoma, skin cancer is the most common cancer in the United States. And within skin cancers, melanoma causes the most deaths among all types of skin cancer. In data from 2021, in the US, over 90,000 people were diagnosed with melanoma, and over 2/3 of melanomas are diagnosed among adults aged 55 years and older. A little over 8,000 people in the US die from melanoma each year, and up to 70% of melanoma is related to UV exposure. So if you look at this map here, this is taken from the CDC, and it represents the age-adjusted melanoma incidence rate over a 10-year period. And of course, we want to look at what's relevant to us here in North Carolina, and you see that we're right in that middle group here in that kind of ochre orangey color. So bringing it into North Carolina, the incidence of melanoma in North Carolina is higher than the national rate. The NCI, or the National Cancer Institute, reports a statewide melanoma incidence rate of 25.7 to 26.9 cases per 100,000 population per year. If you look to the right, there's our national incidence rate at 22.9. And then on an even more granular level, how are we doing here in Forsyth County? So we are reporting 21.6 cases annually per 100,000 population. So the good news is that we're a little bit under our state rate of incidence, and our recent trends over the last 5 years have shown that the incidence rate is falling. So what are the risk factors for melanoma? I like to split these up into extrinsic and intrinsic. And intrinsic, that won't be too much of the topic of today because these are the things that we can't necessarily control. A family or personal history, having lots of moles, having other issues in your medical history, any genetic issues, and also your skin complexion. These are things that we can't control. So really the focus is on the extrinsic risk factors. What can we control? And a big thing here you can see by the amount of space it takes up is the UV radiation. So UV exposure, which includes blistering sunburns in childhood, but it also includes, intense sun exposure and intermittent chronic sun exposure in small spurts. Countries located closer to the equator with increased sun exposure have a higher melanoma incidence rate, and the use of indoor tanning bed also increases the incidence and mortality rate of melanoma. There are some medications and some environmental exposures that are also linked to melanoma. But what I wanted to talk about today was the UV index. The UV index is defined as a daily forecast that predicts the intensity of UV radiation, and we use it to assess the risk of overexposure and to guide our sun safety practices. And if you look at this map on the right, you can see that clear gradient towards the equator. But the other things that determine the UV index are the time of day, the time of year, the altitude, the amount of cloud cover, the ozone layer, and these are all things that contribute to the UV index. So if we want to look at the months of May through August, looking at North Carolina, we use a UV index scale from 1 to 11. And 1 to 2 means low risk, 3 to 5 means moderate risk, 6 to 7 is high risk, 8 to 10 is very high risk, and 11 plus is extreme risk. So the UV index mean for May in North Carolina, which I've outlined here, can be anywhere from the high risk to the very high risk category. And this goes throughout June, July, and August. And for example, looking at the snapshot for July, you can see that we remain in the very high risk for UV overexposure. So I learned this from one of our residents, but because I don't have an Apple Watch, but he said that on the Apple Watch, it actually will automatically show you what the UV index forecast for that day is. And if you don't have an Apple Watch, you can turn to the weather app on the iPhone. And if you look at the weather app and you go down, you will see the UV index forecast. So this was for today. The UV index was, and it gives you the time of day. So you see that we're peaking, during the daytime, and the highest was going to be 7, which is in that very high category. And it gives you this nice little sentence at the bottom saying that sun protection is recommended from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. So North Carolina experiences a varied climate. It's sort of why we love to live here, and it has lots of outdoor attractions, which is essential, which is an essential part of the community's lifestyle. But May through August is characterized by high levels of UV radiation, and at these levels that we define as high or very high risk, they can cause skin damage in as little as 15 minutes without protection. And this includes UV radiation on a cloudy day. It also continues to pose a risk to skin health. So one of the first lines of defense against UV radiation is sunscreen. So I'm going to start with some of the basics. We can divide sunscreens into the mineral and the chemical sunscreens. So on the left, we'll talk about mineral sunscreens and the way that they serve, the purpose that they serve, and how they act to block UV rays. Mineral sunscreens, they tend to be thicker. When you think of lifeguards and how they used to put that thick coating of white on the tip of their nose to protect from sunburns, that's a mineral sunscreen with the active ingredients of zinc oxide or titanium dioxide. And they sit on the skin and they act as a barrier, and they reflect UV radiation. So it goes no further than that protective coat on your skin. Then the majority of sunscreens that we encounter are chemical sunscreens, and they behave differently. They actually absorb UV rays, and a lot of the active ingredients, if you were to turn these sunscreens over and look at their ingredients, are the benzenes and the benzone family. So oxybenzone, avobenzone, octisalate, octocrylene, homosalate, and octinoxate. These are the active ingredients that are absorbed in your skin. And then once your skin takes this chemical up, then it is able to absorb and scatter UV radiation. So again, here's the concepts that I mentioned in diagrammatic form. So you can see that the physical mineral sunscreen reflects the UV rays, so it doesn't even get beyond the top layer of the skin. Whereas chemical sunscreens, it absorbs the UV rays, so the UVA, UVB, it actually enters the screen and then it's kind of scattered away. But either way, it's protecting the epidermis, the dermis, and certainly the hypodermis. UV radiation is not allowed to penetrate through the skin. So the mineral sunscreens act like a shield. They sit on top of the skin. They're great because they work immediately. As soon as you put them on, they act as that shield. And they're also good for sensitive skin. Any of the baby products that are marketed towards children are going to be mineral sunscreens. Because of some safety concerns and limited safety data for chemical sunscreens, it is always recommended to use these physical or mineral sunscreens in young children. Chemical sunscreens act like a sponge. They absorb into the skin and then they take in the UV radiation. The difference is that they're not immediately effective. You need to wait for these to be taken up by the skin. So that's why when you look at the instructions, a lot of times it'll say, put this on 30 minutes before sun exposure. And this is the reason. If you put it on and you're immediately exposed, or you're putting it on while you're already out in the sun, it's not going to be active until it actually absorbs into the skin. The main benefit of chemical sunscreens is that the formulations usually go on a lot smoother. They don't leave a white cast on the skin, and so they've been preferred for a long time for their aesthetic appeal. I wanted to talk about some of the controversies of sunscreen. So going behind the rose-colored glasses, what's with the negative press on sunscreens? Is it founded or unfounded? So looking at the latest on sunscreen safety, which I alluded to earlier, between 1999 and 2023, we had no new UV filters or new sunscreen active ingredients added to the 60 existing active ingredients approved by the FDA, although a lot of different filters were approved internationally. And they use this category called the GRACE, which stands for Generally Recognized as Safe and Effective. And that's a status that's assigned to different active ingredients that we use in formulations in the US. And when you look at the category 1, which are GRACE, generally recognized as safe and effective, zinc oxide and titanium dioxide are listed here. And these are those active ingredients in the physical blockers. The third one, trolamine salicylate, is not currently used in US sunscreen, and para-aminobenzoic acid is also not used in US sunscreen. But the majority of the other active ingredients in chemical sunscreens are in category 3, which means that we actually don't know and we can't categorize them as grays, meaning generally recognized as safe and effective. And when we look at this, this is mostly due to the lack of data rather than, really categorizing these as unsafe and ineffective. So some of the key points on human safety is that the organic UV filters are absorbed systemically during routine use, but there's no evidence to support the negative health effects in humans to date. We have also found that there's no link with sunscreen use with low vitamin D levels. The inorganic UV filters, zinc oxide and titanium dioxide, do not appear to be absorbed systemically, including in nanoparticle form. So these remain the safest with the most data to support their use. And then in 2021, the reason why there was a lot of negative press regarding chemical sunscreens was that benzene was detected above maximum allowed levels in certain sunscreens, which prompted recalls. And benzene we know as a carcinogen. And when they looked at 293 sun care products, 4.7% contained benzene concentrations above the FDA maximum allowed concentrations, and these were mainly sprays and gel sunscreens. So the takeaway from this was when I counsel patients about sunscreen use and particularly safe sunscreen use, I generally do not recommend using sprays or gels. I've never really liked the way that they go on. I don't find them to be very reliable, and I tend to go towards the zinc oxide and titanium dioxide formulations. If you want to talk about our footprint in the broader sense, there are some points about chemical sunscreen use and environmental safety. There's concern about bleaching of corals, and so we have found that UV filters have been identified in water sources all over the world, with oxybenzone detected at the highest concentrations. There was a lab-based study that reported a potential association between organic UV filters and coral bleaching, after which several localities enacted bans of sunscreens containing these ingredients. And again, there's low concern that zinc oxide and titanium dioxide contribute to coral bleaching. And so while these are potential mechanisms, the main driver for coral bleaching still is climate change. I wanted to touch upon my favorite category of sun protection, which is UPF clothing. So UPF, it stands for ultraviolet protection factors. It's a little bit different from the SPF, but it's an analogous measure that measures the effectiveness of sun protective clothing. A shirt with 50 UPF, which is sort of the starting standard level of UV protection factor, that allows 1/50th of the sun's UV rays to pass through to the skin. So that's only 2%. All clothing offers some UPF, but when patients tell me that they're always covered outside, I always ask, what are you wearing? Because a simple white cotton t-shirt will average only about a UPF of 5. And if you're sweating or it gets wet, or if you're at the beach, you're down to a UPF of only 1. So it's pretty negligible. UPF clothing is designed to offer this consistent UV protection, whether wet or dry. And things to consider when you're choosing UPF clothing is how much you're covering, because obviously the more coverage, the better. The material is important, and also the color, because darker colors actually impart greater UV protection factor. My other favorite thing when you're outside, either walking, gardening, or golfing, are UPF hats. And when you're selecting a hat, it's important to consider what shape of the hat you're getting. So which hat provides the best sun protection, and it's that wide-brimmed hat. And I love this figure because it shows you like that little area of sun safety that you're creating for yourself when you're wearing these wide-brimmed hats. So when all is said and done, when should we seek care? I wanted to outline the ABCDEs of detecting melanoma. So A stands for asymmetry. The top panel shows what a symmetric mole looks like, and the bottom shows an asymmetric mole. If you're noticing anything that shows significant asymmetry, that's a reason to come and see us in the Department of Dermatology. We always look at our borders. We like borders that are even. We don't like those borders that are uneven, and again, that goes with the asymmetry. We also look at colors. For the most part, moles are going to be one color, or they can show two colors in a very discrete pattern. So like, a slightly darker ring around the edge, but symmetric. What we don't like to see are these multiple colors that are asymmetric. Sometimes we describe it as like a little Mickey Mouse ear kind of coming off of the side. Seeing those multiple colors will certainly raise some red flags to us. Diameter is one that has sort of decreased a little bit in favor because we're all about detecting melanoma early. So while we do not like moles that are larger and asymmetric and with uneven borders and with multiple colors, if you have any of the other features, we don't want you to wait for it to get much bigger. We want you to come see us now. And that ties into the evolution or the evolving mole. So if you have a mole that is changing in size, shape, or color, these are all reasons to come seek care. So thank you so much for your attention. And I just want to highlight 2 community events that are coming up. We are hosting our second Melanoma Awareness Walk this Saturday at Jamison Park. And if you have any concerns about skin lesions, you can come to our free skin cancer screening event that's going to be held on Wednesday, May 7th. We are holding this event at our 2 different locations in Winston-Salem and in High Point. So if you are looking at your skin more carefully after tonight's talk and you want something checked out, this is a free event where we'll screen you either specific lesions or head to toe. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ahn. And we want to always encourage people to ask questions. In the chat, I see that there is one. Let's see. Thank you for a wonderful talk. Could you please talk about what SPF we need to use and how often we need to reuse it in a day? And are there any advantages for waterproof sunscreen?
Okay, let's see, there are a couple points here. So the necessary SPF, it's going to vary based on what your plan for the day is. So I think a great place to start is to have a baseline level of SPF every day, all year round. So using a daily moisturizer that has SPF, that's going to cover you when you are, driving to work and you're getting ambient UV radiation through your car, walking outside, for small amounts of time. So I think that having that built into your daily regimen is a really great place to start. And then you can kind of stack from there. There are a lot of great sunscreens that are in moisturizers and in makeup. One point to make is that if you are using an SPF in your daily moisturizer and an SPF in your makeup, they are not additive. So if you have an SPF 15 in your moisturizer and an SPF 15 in your makeup, you're still just getting SPF. You are not getting SPF 30. Where I like to start is SPF 30. And then how often to reuse it in a day. To be honest, if I'm not going to be outside from 11 to 5, which I'm usually not during most of the week, I do not think to reapply. So that's from my personal account. It's probably not like what our dermatology like party line is, but I don't think to reapply it. And I am out of the sun during the peak UV index. However, if I have different plans that day and I will be outside during those peak times, I will apply and I will reapply, and I will reapply with a dedicated sunscreen. And that will be an SPF 50 minimum. I was telling Deb earlier that I keep a sunscreen stick in the center console of my car so that if I'm ever caught off guard or if I'm dropping the kids off and they haven't put on sunscreen, I have that SPF rollerball stick and I can do my face, I can do the tops of my hands if I'm driving, and I will reapply throughout the day in those instances. The waterproof sunscreens, they are You know, they're good. They're going to be chemical sunscreens because those are mostly the formulations for the waterproof sunscreens. But still, because that's a sunscreen that it's absorbed, your body sort of clears that. Anything that you put on your skin, your body sort of clears after a couple hours. So even though it's waterproof, it's going to work while you're at the pool for those 2 hours, but you still have to reapply it after every 2 to 3 hours if you're relying at that as if you're relying on that as your main source of sun protection when you're at the beach or at the pool. And I saw a follow-up question about higher SPF working for a longer period of time, and it does not. For that dedicated amount of time, it provides a higher protection from UV radiation. And so the SPF is defined by the minimally erythematous dose. So it's the minimal dose of UV radiation that's going to cause erythema, that's going to cause UV radiation damage. It causes that to be higher. So it basically protects you more from UV radiation, but not for longer.
Well, I have a question. What about if I have a good bit of sunscreen left over from last year? Do the elements in it expire?
Yes. So I am a little skeptic of expiration dates. Sometimes it really doesn't have as much to do with the active ingredients, but the preservatives. So if you have sensitive skin, those preservatives can break down. So I would say don't use it like much past the expiration. However, I admit that I use sunscreens past their expiration date, maybe up to a year, but not long after that.
But
And you'll use them.
if it's within that period, can I use it from the end of one season to the beginning of the next?
Yeah, I
Okay.
think you'll be fine to use it. Sunscreen that's collecting in wrinkles, is there a way to avoid this? I think that's going to be a formulation. That's going to be a formulation issue. So finding the right formulation is going to help. If you haven't tried some of the different the sticks, I'm actually a really big fan of some of the sticks that we use, and they kind of glide on, and they're a lot more sheen to it rather than that chalky white.
Do you have a recommendation as a best sunscreen?
Oh, I have several. I really like Shiseido products. So there is a Shiseido sunscreen roller stick that lives in my car, lives in my purse. Um, Elta MD is also a really great brand that is not too pricey, but really good for sensitive skin. Uses physical blockers, so you know that it's safe and effective. And it also does not clog pores. So anyone who might be, rosacea prone or acne prone, it's a really good product for folks with those other issues.
And I just want to remind people, if you have a question, put it in the Q&A or the chat, just so that we can get Dr. On to address all of those, because we can't address a raised hand. So you've got a question. Sometimes the sunscreen that stays on for a long time but not expired, the liquid separates from it. Is it
Mhm.
still safe?
Yes, but you've got to shake it up because you're basically separating the active ingredients from the inactive ingredients, meaning the suspension that makes that sunscreen feel nice and fluid. So if you get all the liquid, then you're getting all the extra stuff and not the actual sun protection.
And how often should we go to our dermatologist and have a mole check? Just have our skin checked, because I can't see my back. And so what should I do?
So there's no guideline for skin cancer screening, the way that there is for mammograms and colonoscopies. But I think given where we live in North Carolina and if you take into account where you grew up, what your history is with UV radiation, having annual skin checks is a great place to start. And I would leave that up to the dermatologist to say, I think your skin is in great shape. I can see you in 2 years. And then if I tell that to patients, I always say there's a disclaimer here that if there's any concern, anything new, anything that doesn't heal in a 3 months period of time, I want you to come back and see me sooner. Do not wait for the next visit.
Perfect. Okay, we've got one that says my father and brother have had basal skin cell issues. I do not get screened by a dermatologist. Should I have to ask to have that done?
I would recommend it. Having a father and brother with basal cell is the most common type of skin cancer. It's also the most closely linked with your skin complexion and your history of sun exposure. So I would say with that family history, you're probably at slightly higher risk because you probably share a similar complexion with your family members.
For people who use Retin-A at night, do they need to use a higher than 30 SPF during the day?
I don't, not with using a topical retinoid, it wouldn't change anything. The only the only like caveat for that would be if you're irritated from using Retin-A, if you're kind of like flaking and red, your skin can be a little bit more exposed. But if you're using a routine Retin-A, your skin is tolerating it fine, then you're fine with the SPF 30.
Or the clothing that has that protection, does the protection stay even after the garment has been washed? Or should we wash it a certain way?
That's a great question. So the protection factor has to do with either something that is kind of infused into the fabric or the weave of the fabric. And so we find that the sun protection factor does diminish over time and with frequent washing. So a lot of these manufacturing companies will recommend replacing them every 3 to 5 years.
Okay. Well, the last comment was, thank you for such a wonderful talk. And I echo that. Thank you so much. It's good for us to stay active and be outside and have fun, and enjoy our wonderful North Carolina weather. We just want to do as good a job as possible as protecting our skin. So I am going to encourage everyone to get out and play, protect our skin, take care, and I want to date with you on May 13th. So that's going to be the second Tuesday in May. So please make a date. I will be home and hopefully enjoying some beautiful warm weather with my gardening gloves on and my skin sunscreen everywhere else. So until then, live well so we can all age well.